Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Welcome. Hold on one second. I'm getting some weird. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right, welcome. Just let everyone know on the call. We do have, multiple different companies attending today's training session. So please, I ask that if you're not speaking, try to be on mute and then just be, cognizant that there are other companies on the call. My name is Rachel Leidy. I'm going to be doing today's FutureFeed training session number 2. I probably did the first session with you all. So let me share my screen. Where's my screen here? Give me 1 second. I'm gonna make sure I have logged into FutureFeed. Okay, there. All right, you should be seeing FutureFeed now. So today's session number 2 for end user training. And I'm going to be covering assessing, documenting assessments in FutureFeed using the assess area, the different fields under the controls. I'll talk about your system security plan and reviewing it and approving it in FutureFeed, managing your system POA&Ms, and then we'll cover deliverables. Okay, so I'm just going to jump into it. Feel free to, interrupt me and ask questions along the way. I'm here to help you guys with, using FutureFeed to the best of your ability or the best of its ability. And so I'm happy to field any and all questions. All right, so assess. This is where you're going to be, and this is end user training. So if you're a service provider, anything I say here is just applicable to your clients instead of yourself. But this is where you're going to be documenting your internal assessment results. Okay. There is a requirement. I'm sure you guys are all aware, but there is a requirement in the security assessment family to do an annual security control assessment. And so at least once in the year, in an annual cycle, you should be in here and working within the assessment area of FutureFeed to document those assessment results. It does track change objective, assessment objective, status change history. Okay, I just wanted to point that out. All throughout FutureFeed, there's several places we show user activity audit logs. Okay, and this is one of them. So if you ever want to see your, if you had some employees in there, what was changed, you can check out the change history. Also, as you see here, you can filter. Okay. But during an assessment, the goal would be to evaluate every one of the controls or every one of the requirements in that framework you're in. So up here on the top is how you toggle between the different frameworks that your company is subscribed to. So make sure you're sitting in the right one for that assessment. And then you just go through all of the controls. Now, I've been assessing 800, 171 and 853 for some time. So there, as you do these assessments, you'll realize that there's some controls that really relate. And so you may want to assess those together. For example, like the AC controls really relate to the IA controls. And so when I do assessments, I do those two families together right away. So that way my mindset, I'm still thinking about identification and authentication tools and the processes. HR often does awareness and training as well as personnel security. So you might want to do those families together. It just really depends on how your company has implemented these requirements and who's involved. And that it may result in, how you approach assessing these controls and what controls you assess first or together. Um, so let's look at, actually, I'm going to switch to a different environment here. And we're going to look at the 318 control. So the first thing I want to show you is we have this change layout setting here. So you could rearrange your layout. I rearrange them. Like if I'm going through here, if I'm going to go into FutureFeed and my purpose is only to make sure that all of my security controls have some people identified, then, maybe I want to just display interview up top. Or if my purpose is I'm going in here to check out the evidence, rearrange them. But they all have these 6 fields. They have an area called the requirement satisfaction summary. This is where you're documenting your results, whether a control is met or not met. It's also how you where you define how that requirement is met in your environment. Then interview, this is where you're identifying everybody that's responsible for this control. And again, we're using the RACI model, RACI model. So when you're building out this section of FutureFeed, of course, whoever you're talking to within your company to validate if these requirements are implemented or not, this is who you would identify under interview. This is also, once you get FutureFeed set up and fully populated, you're also going to want to use it to drive any external assessments. Okay, so when you do move into an official external assessment, maybe with a C3PAO organization, they're going to interview people. They cover every control and they make sure to interview someone for every requirement. And so this is also who you should identify here, who you want the external assessors to interview. Really, it's probably the same person, but sometimes maybe not. But anyway, it's who's interviewed for any internal assessments as well as who's going to be interviewed for any external assessments. Examine, this is where you're going to house some evidence, documentation evidence. Test, also some more evidence. These are the tools, the technology you're using at your company to help you implement the requirement. We have an area called potential assessment considerations. This is if you are doing an internal assessment and maybe you're stuck, you don't know what questions to ask, you don't know who to talk to. This is some guidance on helping, to help you do that internal assessment. And then additional artifacts is a place where you can house artifacts specific to this requirement you're in. All right, so let's look at them in more detail now. So the requirement satisfaction summary, I'm sure you guys have all seen this look, but we'll go over all of the fields. Okay, we have a summary notes section. It is included in your system security plan. So this is where at a high level, you're defining how this requirement is implemented as a whole. Then down under the objectives, we have objective statement sections. This is also included in your system security plan, but here's where you're defining how that specific objective is implemented in your requirement. So this is very detailed per the objectives down here, and then here is a higher level, the control as a whole, how's it being implemented. Confidence rating, this is more for, our service providers, or, if you're speaking with someone, let's say I ask them this first objective. Hey, do you guys have defined a limit of unsuccessful logon attempts? And if they're like, well, I'm not sure, maybe low confidence. But if they're like, yeah, absolutely, I define that myself in this document, let me get you that document, then you have a higher level of confidence on that response. Some people choose to use this, some people don't like to use it at all, but just know that this does show up in your system security plan, okay? So I would say make it a point after you generate a system security plan, you can make it a point to delete out this area if you're not going to use it. or at least go in here and make everything a high confidence rating, because the last thing you want to do is give a C3PAO assessor a system security plan with some control results, and you're advertising that you don't have a very good confidence level that that implementation is accurate or not. You don't want to do that. So um as you can see here in FutureFeed, we've designed it so you are evaluating at the objective level, which is great. Whenever you're working on implementing a requirement or evaluating a requirement, do so at the objective level. That's how all your CMMC assessors are taught. And if you fail one objective, you fail the overall requirement. Um, with a couple exceptions there, but just a general rule of thumb. So you're tracking status at the objective level. Is it met, not met, not applicable? And identifying implementation at the objective level and inheritance at the objective level. That's what this little teardrop is for. So if you have, for this one here, for this example here, if you have a external service provider that is implementing, let's say, this objective B for you. So in my statement here, I have, in this fake environment, I have Windows assets, I have an on-prem firewall, and I'm using a tool called Prevail, which is offering me secure end-to-end encryption. So in my Windows, it says the defined means of limiting unsuccessful logon attempts is implemented by Entra ID with a policy that's enforcing. Can you guys give me 1 second here? I'm sorry, give me 1 second. I do have a child that's calling me. Okay, sorry about that. They called and texted, and it could have been an emergency, but it wasn't. All right, so here in my Windows boxes, this requirement of limiting unsuccessful logon attempts is being applied and enforced on my Windows endpoints with Entra ID and a policy. And I go on to say that Entra ID is managed by an external service provider, and they're the ones responsible for managing and configuring Entra ID per my company's requirements. So I have an external service provider that is responsible for meeting a part of this requirement in my environment. That is referred to as inheritance in FutureFeed. And so when you state that there's some sort of external service provider doing a service that's meeting the requirements, then you want to make sure to identify that in this inheritance icon. Okay. In this situation, though, in my environment, I have Windows boxes that are being managed by an external service provider, but I have an on-prem firewall. And it says that the defined means of limiting unsuccessful logon attempts is implemented by a local configuration setting on that firewall, which is managed by my company's IT admins. So there's no external service provider involved here. It's completely up to my company. It's my system and that admins that are responsible for maintaining the configuration of my firewall. And so in this case, for this objective, my inheritance is partially inherited. Okay. It's not fully inherited because my company still had some responsibility with implementing this requirement, this objective requirement in the environment. So partial inheritance, we have some ESP engagement, but also some internal responsibility. When you mark something inherited, I'll do it on this one. If I mark this one partially inherited, this little yellow triangle pops up. So now what it's saying is, hey, you just identified that there's some inheritance here. Please tell me where that inheritance is coming from. That's what the yellow triangle means. So you click on it, and then you would define the external service provider and the shared responsibility matrix that is in play here. So I would click Entra and Prevail if I was in that other objective, as I did here, Entra and Prevail. Okay. Because in my statement, I also say that we're using Prevail, and this requirement of limiting unsuccessful logon attempts, my company has no responsibility. It's an application. I can't control that application's configuration settings. So it's being fully managed and implemented by the Prevail external service provider. Another thing I want to point out here is, like I think I mentioned, is I am a CCA. So I do perform C3PAO assessments. And a big failure that I've seen in several occasions is that I'll go into an assessment and that client does have a system security plan, but in the system security plan, in the implementation method or narrative section, it's only addressing one or two of the major assets. Okay. So it's really important for you guys to understand your assessment scope or your compliance boundary, and to understand the different assets in there. You know, you got servers, user endpoints, mobile devices, firewalls, routers, switches. Okay. So anything that's in that assessment scope, think about, well, the way you should evaluate implementation is ask this question for every asset in the boundary. How is the defined means of limiting unsuccessful logon attempts implemented on my servers, on my firewall, on my mobile devices, on our company cell phones, in my switches and routers, okay? And then address that implementation for all those assets. So that's what I'm trying to depict here, is make sure you address the implementation for all in-scope assets. Now, if that implementation is the same across the board, then one statement is sufficient. But when it comes to the technical requirements, usually those technical requirements get implemented a couple different ways.
Question? I don't know if this is in scope for this or not. But for instance, for this unsuccessful login attempts, so where do you define the parameter about how many attempts you're going to allow?
Sure, and that's a great question. So in this statement here, kind of seen it two ways. Okay. Here I've seen it where well, one, you need to have it defined, and it's up to your company where you want to define that. Do you want to define it in your system security plan? Some companies, especially like the smaller companies, like to define it in their system security plan. But you could also have it defined in a document, a policy, somewhere else. It doesn't have to be defined in your SSP. Okay. So here's an example where we say the means of limiting unsuccessful logons attempt is defined as yada, yada, yada. So you can define it in your SSP. Or, let's see.
And how'd you get here to the screen?
Oh, I'm sorry. I clicked on the statement. So,
statement.
yeah,
Okay.
that. So, or you point to a document. So the means of limiting unsuccessful logon attempts is defined in this document. So it's up to you if you want to define it here, in which case, if you define it here, it's going to be defined in your SSP, because that's what you're doing. You're building out your SSP. Or reference where it is defined. My recommendation is always make sure there's just one source
Yeah.
of truth. Okay. So that way, don't define it in multiple places, because then eventually you'll put yourself in a position where you could have different definitions, which could lead to a failure. So always just have one source of truth and stick with that and define it in
And
one
to
place.
maintain and stuff, yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep. Okay. So very important for you to fill out the assessment objective statements, describing how that requirement is implemented in your environment. And then a rule of thumb in these statements, if I mention a document, then it should be found down below under my evidence sections, down here under examine, where my documents are found. If I mention a document, a process, a procedure, a worksheet, a form, a plan, a checklist, okay, any sort of documentation that I mention in my implementation narrative, either here at the summary notes area or here in my assessment objective statements, then I should find it down below. It should be connected down below under the examine area. If I mention a person, a team, a role, then it should be found down below in the interview section. And if I mention a tool, some technology that I'm using to implement this requirement, then it should be found down below under the test area, okay? Because that's all of your evidence. It's evidence that what you're stating in here under your summary notes or your objective statements, you want to associate that evidence down below so that way you could quickly pull it up and display it to an assessor.
Can you go back and forth so that if you forgot to put that evidence in, you can go back and pull that document in, or at least reference it so you can reference it, put it in the list so you can reference it when you're doing these statements?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's two ways to connect evidence. So right, if you scroll down and let's say this is a bad example because it's already there, but to add other evidence, you just click add and find it,
Okay.
navigate to it and click it.
I know you're supposed to try to add some of these things up front, but I
Yeah.
mean, you're not gonna get them all.
Right, exactly. So as you're logging your documents and creating these document inventory assets, when you create a document, yeah, the goal is to then go in and connect that document to all of the control requirements. But sometimes you miss some, or sometimes you may connect something that you shouldn't have. So really, when you're doing your internal assessment, you should also be, as you're doing your assessment, make sure you have everything appropriately connected. This is the point. This is the time when you would want to clean up any of, like, here I have my anti-phishing policy. Why do I have that there? I'll delete it, but also add anything that you need to add. Remove everything that doesn't need to be there. Up here, it's up to your guys' company and how you want to do this. But let's say I'm talking to someone in my IT department, and I ask them, and we're evaluating this first objective, and I ask them, hey, do you guys have a defined limit of unsuccessful logon attempts? If they say yes, then it's up to you if you want to mark it met just by word. Hey, they said yes, I'm going to mark it met. Me, when I was doing compliance management, I tried to refrain from marking something as complete or compliant or met until I actually had that evidence. Okay, because if they say, yeah, it's defined somewhere, your next statement should be, okay, please give me that document because I need it for my evidence. I need to put it in FutureFeed and connect it down below. So there's a few ways you could do this. You could mark it met and still create a poem. Um, and then your poem would be, please provide uh, access control policy document. Add. Okay. And click on the poem, get it assigned to the right person. Whoever I was just interviewing and they said, yeah, that's defined somewhere, is probably the person you would uh, identify as responsible for this poem item. But now I'm creating a system poem so I don't forget. So I don't forget, or if that other person doesn't forget, then I need that document as evidence. Um, so you can mark things met and still create a poem. You could mark them not met because you don't have that evidence and create your poem. Or you could leave it in unknown state and still create a poem. Completely your guys' call. But I would say before moving into any official, external assessment, do make sure if you say something's met, you have evidence and you have a solid implementation narrative. Okay. Any questions on this requirement satisfaction summary area? All right. So down below, interview, I think we pretty much covered this. You don't have to have someone tagged in every objective. If you don't have anybody who needs to be consulted or anybody who needs to be formed, you can leave them blank. But do try to have at least one of these objectives filled out. And then think of FutureFeed. It's not, once you get this area set up, yes, it's going to be super great and helpful and beneficial for when you go have that C3PAO assessment. But also when you do your internal assessments, that is a requirement to do an annual security control assessment. If you have this area filled out, then it's going to make your internal assessments move a lot, be a lot more quick and smooth, okay? Because let's say, now it's year 2, I go in here and I have to do my annual assessment, then the process is a little bit different. You're not going to have to develop out the narrative because there should be already one in there. And you're not going to have to identify people because there should be people identified. So the process is going to be reading how the company has implemented that requirement, talking to the people who are identified here, and gathering new evidence. Okay. So you're building this out not only for external assessments, but really to help you with your internal assessment process. But interview, that's where you're defining people responsible, examine all of your evidence, technology, all your tools that you're using to implement that. And then down here, like I said, if you're kind of stuck on what questions to ask, here's some questions related to the requirement that are meant to help you with doing that internal assessment. And you can click on them. If you mark them yes, here you're saying, okay, why did I say yes? Why is this passed? So you're developing out that implementation narrative. Or if you say no, why was it a no? What failed? And you're creating a poem. Um, Additional artifacts. Let's talk about this quick. So here is a place for you to upload, of course, evidence, screenshots, reports, other documents that are specific to this requirement. And the only thing I have to say about this is when it comes to evidence, it's better housed elsewhere than here. Okay? And let me show you what I mean. If I go to documents, I'm going to go to a policy. Sorry, policy. All right, I have this acceptable use policy. And this acceptable use policy is connected to these controls. how many we got here? 9. It looks like 9. So my acceptable use policy is connected to these 9 controls. An assessor is going to want to see my acceptable use policy in use. They're going to want to know that they're going to want to see that I'm having my employees read this acceptable use policy and sign it, and that I'm educating my employees on the acceptable use of the data and systems in this environment. Okay. So an assessor is going to want to have that evidence. So not only are you going to show an assessor your working version of your acceptable use policy, the latest and greatest approved version of your acceptable use policy, but you're also going to have to show them that your employees are abiding by it and you're educating them. And typically that's with a signature. AUPs usually have a signature. Sometimes these are also referred to as rules of behavior. Um, but instead of me taking that signed acceptable use policy and uploading it under each one of those 9 controls, so going there, going to that control, going down, and uploading that evidence here, it's better that you would upload that evidence to the actual acceptable use policy inventory item. So here, I would put the evidence, the signed versions of my acceptable use policy, I'd put it here. So that way I only have to upload it once here. And now that evidence is going to be found under all 9 of these requirements. Okay, so I have this first one, 311. If I am doing an internal assessment or an external assessment, I look at 311, somewhere in this narrative, it's going to say, we're educating our employees, our users of this environment on what is expected of them for limiting access via my acceptable use policy. So then down below, I would want to find that acceptable use policy. Okay, there it is. I'd click on it. It opens up that inventory item. And now in this evidence section is where I'm going to see evidence that that acceptable use policy is in use. Okay. So we do have a separate section down here for you to upload evidence, but just note, especially if you've been doing this a while, evidence can be used to show that multiple controls are implemented, typically. Some evidence. Some evidence is very specific to that requirement. And so sometimes it makes sense to upload evidence directly to a requirement, in which case that evidence is only going to be found ever under that one requirement. Or if you find yourself having to upload that evidence multiple times under several different controls, then it's probably best to just house that evidence within whatever inventory item is generating that evidence. Okay. So just to kind of reiterate, you know, I have HR offboarding procedures. My evidence that that offboarding procedure is getting used would be inside its inventory item under the evidence section. My access request form, everybody uses it. I'm not going to upload all employees' access request forms. I just need to upload a couple, and I would upload it to that inventory's evidence folder. And then just make sure it's connected to the right controls so that that evidence and the document itself can be found under that control. All right, back to the assess area. So I covered all of the sections. Does anybody have questions related to documenting assessments in FutureFeed and the results and the evidence. I think so. I covered how to create a poem. FutureFeed will. So if I go to this control here, notice I have no poems. As soon as you mark something not met, it does create that first poem entry for you. Okay, so that's pretty nice. But you'll want to make a point then to open up that poem item and tailor it. Make sure you get it assigned to the right person. Identify impact, effort, and cost. Set a due date. And then in here into this poem description, this is where you're describing what needs to be done. What failed and what's the correction, what's the fix, what do you got to get implemented. And you can create multiple poem items for one objective. So here I have one. I can click on it and then make another poem. Hit add. And now I have 2 poem items for this one objective. To see them both, here's this top one. This is my first poem item. And then if I scroll down, here's the second poem. Okay. So some people like, especially the larger companies, let's go back to that technical requirement where they have to configure their IT assets to limit unsuccessful logon attempts. Well, if you have Linux system administrators, you might want to create a poem item for that team. And if you have Windows system administrators, you might want to create a poem for that team. Okay, so you can create more than one poem for an objective.
Hey, Rachel.
Mhm.
Right on the screen there, my team was talking about how do we use the discuss not in SSP icon. Can that be used for like purely internal conversations
Yes. Yep. So here,
that
oh, I'm sorry.
we want to use between the
Hey, Matthew, just to let you know, I didn't mean to interrupt you. It sounds like we're having connectivity issues. But I think I understood your question. Can you still hear me okay?
Yeah, I can. I think it's on my end.
Okay. All right, let me reshare my screen and I'll answer your question. All right, so you're absolutely correct. So it says not in SSP. So whatever you put in here, it won't be displayed in your system security plan. That's important to note. And this area here is really helpful especially for companies who just are getting started on identifying and working on these requirements. This is an area for you to like put notes. For this one here, you might put notes of an internal. So, Rachel, please reach out to IT department and get this answer. You can make task related notes or just any sort of notes or comments you have about this requirement. Then this discuss these this is an internal notes area for this requirement. So anybody who goes back into this requirement and they open up this discuss, they're going to see your notes or comments. If you want to like chat with your team members, then you would do that up here in this discussion area, top right. Here is where you can make a discussion and tag someone, and now you're having a conversation with that person. It's still an internal discussion, but now you can tag individuals and have that back and forth. Whereas in the control, this is just where you're going to make internal comments about this control, and they'll stay right here. And if someone wants to come and see them, they have to go to this control and open it up to see what someone put in there. Okay?
Yep. Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, moving on then to system security plan. This is a browser view of your system security plan. Okay, at any point in time in FutureFeed, you can go and generate a system security plan. To do that, you would go to deliverables and run a system security plan report. But it's only going to be as accurate and as complete as the data you have in FutureFeed. It's pulling from sections of FutureFeed to generate that SSP. And so this is a browser view of that. And it's meant to be helpful with reviewing the system security plan and just making sure that that information in there it's filled out and it's accurate. So that way, when you run a system security plan report, you generate an SSP export, then you know that that data is accurate and all of the sections are filled out. So here is, we have reviewed flags, and if you want to reset them, you just click on the setting icon. I always forget what that icon is called, like a cogwheel or something. I don't know. But click on that and you can reset all the flags. Okay. So right now, someone reviewed this section of my system security plan. And by checking that they reviewed it, to me, that tells me they reviewed it and they're saying it's filled out and it's accurate. And if I want to see who did that, you can click on the history and see who last did that review. And as you know, your system security plan, you should review it. I would recommend at least once in a year, if not more frequently, but definitely within 3 years. Okay. But so whenever you have to go into that official system security plan review cycle, whenever you've made major updates to your environment, or maybe you just did an annual security control assessment, so you want to make sure your SSP is accurate, you're moving into a official system security plan review cycle. And so you're going to want to go in here and just reset all the flags and uncheck them. See, now it's not reviewed. So that way it's starting fresh. And now you're going to go through every section of your SSP and review that information and then mark it reviewed. And you can assign this review to individuals here if you'd like. But it's just meant to be a nice browser presentation of your SSP, so you could navigate the different sections with more ease, as well as if you see that there's an issue. For example, let's say my system categorization here was wrong. Click the edit button. It brings me back to that section of system security plan where that data is being captured, so I can change it. Here, I'm going to set it all to a mod. And now if I go back to my SSP, it's at a mod. Okay. So you're reviewing. Okay. Now everything is accurate. I marked it reviewed. It's all accurate, but it's the tracking that review and making it easy so you can edit information. It also will highlight some stuff red. Okay. So in here, it's telling me I got some red. I'm missing some data in here. And it looks like I've not gone in and categorized my assets all the way. And so you can see where there's some information missing. But that's all your SSP is. You'd want to make it a point to reset those flags, conduct an official review, mark the sections as reviewed, and edit the data as needed. And then that way, when you go over to deliverables and you're going to run that SSP report, you're going to have a high level of confidence that that data is accurate and all of the sections are filled out. Okay. Any questions on SSP? Okay. Your FutureFeed, this is your system POA&M. So all throughout FutureFeed, as you were filling out the different areas in FutureFeed, there was some triggers that would have made a POA&M entry. Okay, for example, as I just showed you, if you mark an objective as not met, it's creating a system POA&M entry. In the documents area, you have in the documents and tools area, there's two areas. You have active documents. These are documents that are enforced in your company. They've been around, they're approved, you guys are following them. And then if you scroll down, you have pending documents. So these are documents, policies, plans, procedures that you guys are working on developing and working on implementing for the purpose of meeting the requirements. Okay. When you create an entry here, when you create that document entry, it's putting it on your system POA&M because it knows it's a pending document. You're still developing it. Same thing with tools, active tools. These are things that are in production. You guys are using them. And then if you got to acquire any tools, maybe you're going to pick up a new cloud environment or a new application. Then when you log them here, it's adding them to your system POA&M. And by the way, if you added them in the wrong area, let's say you accidentally added it up here and it's not active, just click into it. And that's what this field is up here. Active or pending. As soon as you mark something pending, you're putting it on your system POA&M. Same with documents. If you created a document in the wrong area, just open it up and mark it pending or active. And again, if you're clicking on pending, you're making a system POA&M. So when you mark objective requirements is not met, you're creating a POA&M, and then you can create POA&Ms for your technology and you can create POA&Ms for your documentation. And then all of those POA&Ms are going to show up here under the system POA&M area or your FutureFeed area. This first page, these are all your POA&Ms listed out, all your pending, in progress, and completed POA&Ms. Okay, and then what we did is we incorporated this project builder. So right now in this environment, I have 45 POA&M items that are open. And instead of me trying to manage all 45 items, it makes sense that I would group the like non-compliance, okay? So let me see what I got here. Let's make a project that's it's going to contain only the technical items because I'm a small company and I only have one system administrator and he's going to do all the work. So I'm going to put all of the technical non-compliance into one project, get it assigned to him to work on. You could scroll through and click on, let's see. This is a technical one. So you could scroll through and click on them. Okay. But you could also search by keyword. First, let me add these to the project. And I'm going to I'm going to create a new one. Actually, I already have one called system admin work. I'm going to make it part of that project. I can, keywords. What is a technical keyword? System. Usually when it says information system or system, it's talking about something on that system. So here's multi-factor authentication gets deployed. Here's another unsuccessful logon attempt. Okay, but notice over here in this column, you can see it's already part of my system admin work project. So I don't need to add it. This one is not though, so I'll add that one to my, okay. So it says to add, build out projects, it's that easy. Click on them, add to projects, add them to an existing project. If you don't have projects or an existing project, then you can create a new one. And then if your goal is to put everything in a project, so instead of working on 45 different line items, I'm only working on 5 or 10 different projects that I have to kind of manage and check in on and make sure people are doing their work and gather status updates. 45 isn't a lot, but sometimes for companies who are just getting started in this CMMC world, right? We're talking hundreds, 200s, 300 POA&M items, and that's a lot to manage. And so grouping them into like non-compliance or grouping them based on the team or the role or the person who's going to be doing the work is only going to make the amount of POA&M entries that you have to stay on top of and make sure people are doing their work and maybe get status updates. It's going to make it a lot more manageable. Okay. To see what items aren't part of a project, you would filter over here under proposed projects. And I don't have many in this area here. I got a filter. Let me clear out the filter. And then the things that the lines that have a plus, they're not part of a project. So here I have a access control policy we're developing. I'm going to make it part of my, I don't have one. Maybe I need a security documentation project, and I'm going to assign it to my tech writer. Okay. So go through, hit on the ones. Here I have something about Windows. That's a technical one. Okay. I'll give it to my system admin. Okay. So that's how I like to do it, is I like to make sure every POA&M item is part of a project. So that way I can only focus on the projects. Then to see a listing of your projects, that's your project portfolio. Here's all my projects. And then make it a point to like open up the project, identify impact, effort, and cost, describe the project, start and stop date, get it assigned to the right person. And there's other fields in here. Project price. Is there going to be a cost associated with the remediation? Maybe I have to purchase a tool or a new application. And then, yeah, this was a bad example. There's nothing part of that project. Let me click the one we just did. So this one. When you scroll down to the bottom, here's all of the individual POA&M items that are part of this project. Okay. Any questions on POA&Ms, projects? To mark things complete, you just click on the complete item. Why is it complete? What was done? Mark it complete. Same with projects over here. Opening up the project and marking it complete is going to close out POA&M items. In a project though, you do, even though you can mark the project complete, you do have to go down and make sure, again, that was a bad example. Let me go back into this one. So even if I mark the project complete, which I can't right now because you have to first get it accepted and then it has to move through the flow, but you do have to close out the individual POA&M items that are part of that project in order to close out the whole project. Okay. Any questions with projects or POA&Ms? All right, then the last area we'll go over is the deliverables. Let's start with the SSP since we already talked about that. So here's where you can export an SSP. Just click download, or if you click the play button, it's gonna show you the SSP in browser. I'm not gonna do that because it may take some time, but
Sorry, I was
You're
technical troubles here. Suppose you have a poem like on an ongoing project that's just to update some software. Do you really have to make a project out of it, or?
no, you don't have to. If
Okay.
you can choose, like, if I was managing this system's POA&M right now, one, I would make sure to check in on my projects every once in a while, but then I would also make sure to go over to my system POA&M and check in on the items that are not part of a project. So here is telling me these are not part of a project. So I do need to make sure I'm staying on top of these POA&M items. So if you don't want to put something into a project, you don't have to. You're just gonna manage that item from this view instead of this view.
Okay, so at a higher level, a project portfolio is a group of related poems you're treating as a project, managing as a project.
Yep.
Okay. So something like, hey, upgrade if you run a scan and it comes out, you have to upgrade a bunch of things, you can just put them in independently. Thank you.
Yep. One thing, since that made me remember something, whether I'm in a project or an individual POA&M, okay, it doesn't matter, but I want to show you I am hoping to update our tool to have more POA&M fields. Like if you click into a POA&M right now, you see, sorry, I should have clicked into the actual POA&M item. Let me show you here for a control. So I don't have any area to like make individual tasks related to this POA&M item or really make some notes. You can put your notes in the descriptions if you want. There's workarounds. You could put like if I was going to update today, you know, I might want to put today's date 5/15/2025 status update, you know, and then provide a little narrative about what's the status. But I want to show you that also if you want to make tasks related to POA&M items or projects. So for example, this policy here, whether I'm going to click on it here or I go into my project, which I put in the security documentation, or I click on it here, it doesn't matter. But let's say I want to create a subtask for this POA&M item. I would click on it. It's going to open up that document's inventory item. Then I'm going to go over to the tasks and create that task here. So, you know, you probably have a task to get it filled out, get it reviewed and approved by someone who needs to review and approve it. Maybe you have a task to make sure your technical writer approves it for formatting and accuracy, you know. So this is where you're going to create tasks in the inventory cards themselves. You can't create a task in the POA&M. You can't create a task in the POA&M, but you create a task within the thing that made the POA&M, if that makes sense. Okay, so here I have a
Oh,
document, a diagram. We don't have a network diagram yet. Well, I can't log that task in here, but I can open up it and then create the task. Hey, complete the diagram and assign it to the right person. So that's how you get people working on the actual issues, is within the tasks, in the tools and the documents. And then if it's a control POA&M item, you'll have to put that task elsewhere. What is that control requiring? Is it requiring a document? Is it requiring a technical implementation? In which case you'd go and find that technology and create a task there. Okay. You'll really get a feel for it the more you start using FutureFeed.
mhm.
All right. Then deliverables. I know we're at time, so I apologize for those of you that may need to drop for another meeting, but do know that this session was being recorded, and so you will get a link to the recording and you can watch the last of it here if you have to drop. So under SSP reports, here's where you're going to generate your SSP report. And I wanted to show you that after you generate a report, like this one here, someone generated an SSP on April 8th. I can click on that history item now. You just saw me, I can click the edit button, or I can click over here and it opens up this. So if you want to document approval of like an exported version of your SSP, you could do so here. Who approved it? When did they approve it? Make some version notes, you know, maybe this is version 2.0 of your SSP, and what changed and who needs to approve it. Did you also submit to SPRS at the same time? Because remember, once you submit your score into SPRS, they want you to also identify the version of your system security plan that aligns with that score you're submitting in SPRS. So here you can identify if that was submitted into SPRS or not and what day. So we're working on improving the SSP approval functionality in FutureFeed right now, but the only way you can document approved versions of your SSP is after you generate that SSP, it gets saved down here in the version history. Then you would click it, make version notes, and document the approval this way. But I always recommend after you generate a SSP, actually, it's going to be in a Word document, convert it to PDF, and then have someone digitally sign that document or even wet sign it. Here's a Spurs submission SSP area. So it's going to display your score, your dates, poem dates, assessment dates, cage code association. And what you're doing here is if you click snapshot now, you're generating a version of your SSP, and then it would be saved automatically down below under the records area. So that way you always have a version of that SSP that aligns with that score that you submitted in the PIEE system. You can also export all of the documents, all the evidence files that you upload or create in FutureFeed. You can export them. You're going to need to do this before moving into a C3 PAO assessment. When you engage that external assessor, they want you to send over all of that evidence. They call it the body of evidence. So they want your SSP, they want all your plans, your policies, your screenshots, all that stuff. So to generate that, you would export all those files, and you can even export all of the data. It will be displayed in an Excel spreadsheet with the fields labeled. Poem, if you want to export your poem for whatever reason, you can export a listing of your poem items as well as a listing of those project items. And then here, the last thing I'll cover is this presentation builder. So what you're doing here, it's a quick way to create reports or presentations based on all the work you've done already in FutureFeed. So all that data you've put into FutureFeed, all the assessment results, all the poems you created, all the projects you created, all the responsibility assignments, you can create quick reports on that information and presentations. So it's a simple, you'll visit the setup area, put your name, whoever's making the report of the presentation, what is the purpose of the report of the presentation? Here's the executive summary. What are you trying to display? And then go over to cyber readiness, table of contents, and select the different information you want to see. Okay, so maybe I'm going to be meeting with my CEO, and I need to tell him, I need to brief him on the assessment results. What's my score? And I want to brief him also on my system security plan. So select the data. If you want to brief on a specific project, you could drill down to the different projects. This would be great if you're meeting with just that individual that you've assigned that project to and you need to talk to them about that project. All right, so you just select what you want visible and then hit play, and it will create for you a nice presentation. Again, it's only going to be as accurate as the data in FutureFeed. It's pulling that data from FutureFeed. So here's my assessment scope. It defines my system boundary, purpose of the system, what we said was out of scope. It lists out my cage code, contracts, a bunch of assessment information there. Here's my more details, my score, how many poems I have, is down here. Let's see. And then what else did I forgot what I select. Here's more of the assessment status. It talks about, it shows this environment's not filled out, but it would show better how many are met, how many are not met, how many still need to be evaluated. And then here's my SSP, the different areas of my SSP, my system information, contact information, assets involved, all that stuff. Okay. Right now it looks more like a presentation view, but if you generate a report, it does look more like an official report instead of like a PowerPoint presentation, which is nice. All right, any questions?
Hey, I missed like the first 2 minutes of this. Basically, what you went over, does it also apply, does it also support like FSMA moderate, like if you would use 853 instead of CMMC?
We do have 853 available now. So here's a look of 853. I'll go to the assess page. Here's the assess page. Of course, a lot more security controls in here. We have features related to, so we have an ODP center in 853. You know, there's a lot of requirements that you have to define. The organization defined parameters. So here we have a way to help you set all of those in one view. Um, you know, if you're interested in learning more about the 853 management in the tool, I would reach out to sales@futurefeed.com and they'll initiate. We could go over how, you know, how FutureFeed looks for 853 package and the different ways we dock. Here's how control looks. You know, because they're a lot more detailed in controls, but see how it says the blank access control
Yes,
policy.
yes.
Is it a organization level policy, mission system level?
Okay.
And then linking that document here. Okay. So it's a little bit different of a feel, but very awesome. And yeah,
So the training for that, I would have to request it at the link that you gave me.
actually for you, why don't you go ahead and email me directly, because we don't actually have training for 853. Like I can train you one-on-one, but I don't have any official training cycles because not too many people are using 853 yet.
Okay.
So
My
let
boss
me,
was kind of curious about that. I need to get on and use the CMMC first.
okay.
And then with the goal of using this for 853 for us.
Yeah, perfect. And we have a way, you know, I'm sure you know, like there's control requirements in 800-171 that directly relate to
Yep.
control requirements in 853. And so we have a copy framework option. So if you filled out 800-171 or CMMC controls, you can quickly send over all that data and all that evidence and that narrative to those 853 controls and get them filled out a lot quicker. So yeah, I'd be happy to do some one-on-one training for that. I just put my email in the chat. It's rlighty@futurefeed.co. If you reach out to me and, you know, whenever you're interested in purchasing 853 for your company, as well as doing the training, reach out and I'll get you set up with the right people.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you for your time this afternoon. Sorry we ran over a little bit. Reach out to support@futurefeed.co if you have any questions. Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome all. Bye. Have a good afternoon.
You too.